Network Africa, local reports in Egypt suggest that journalists are being jailed on a weekly basis. An example is the photographer Ali Abdeen, who works for the news website El Fagr. We understand he got 2 years for inciting illegal protests, obstructing traffic, and that catch-all offense known as publishing false news. In his defense, his organization insists that Abdeen was simply attempting to cover protests against an Egyptian government deal to hand control of 2 Red Sea islands to Saudi Arabia. At least 33 journalists were detained on the same day as Abdeen, many of them released, but a group called Journalists Against Torture Observatory says it documented as many as 97 violations against journalists, including 46 detentions, 16 beatings, and 10 cases of equipment being confiscated. All of this allegedly happened on April 25th. The VOA's Edward Urania joins us from Cairo now. Edward, thank you for joining us on Network Africa. The Egyptian minister has denied the arbitrary arrests of those journalists as opposed to reports that are, everywhere. So who really is telling the truth here?
Well, it's often difficult to get to the bottom of this kind of situation and have all the facts. So I wouldn't pretend to have them all, but at the same time, what I do know is that most of the journalists who were arrested or detained after that particular protest were released. One of our cameraman journalists here with VOA was concerned that the security forces were checking correspondents' mobile phones, what they were saying, and then ultimately checking their posts on Facebook. So I know that the security forces do that. So perhaps one might assume that the person that was arrested and convicted had been posting things that the government didn't like, which would be in keeping with what the foreign minister said, because inciting protests, violent protests, is deemed to be illegal in Egypt at this moment. So, there's a bit of truth on both sides of what's being said.
Well, moving on, Edward, we understand the president, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, has just offered to mediate in the Israeli-Palestinian peace talks. What's in it for the president and why intervening now?
Well, I think the now issue has to do with the French desire to convoke an international peace conference, which was supposed to be in the coming weeks. I think it's been postponed, put off, but at the same time, the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, was here in Cairo last week, and I think this is probably President Sisi's first speech to the public since that visit. So that might be the cue. He was inaugurating an electricity plant, and I assume he needed something to say. So that's probably a logical subject to talk about. And whether he really found any other motivations for it. Certainly Egypt has traditionally been the arbiter between Palestinians and Israel. It's done that whenever there's been a conflict in Gaza. I believe there have been at least 3 in the years I've been here in Cairo since 2008.
Edward, you say it could be that he just wanted something to say, but could it also be the president wanted to score points and improving his reputation abroad?
There's always that possibility, but I think it's something that an Egyptian president would normally talk about, since Egypt has been the honest broker, at least considers itself the honest broker in terms of intervening between the Palestinians and the Israelis. What he had to say sounded very statesman-like, so undoubtedly he was trying to pose as a statesman. Whether that's positive or negative, I would assume it's a positive.
Edward, thanks for joining us on Network Africa.
My pleasure, Amarashi.
The VOA's Edward Urania from Cairo. Now here's a story which really hits close to home. Coast Guard officials confirmed a dinghy which was carrying 112 migrants and headed to Europe yesterday was intercepted. The migrants, who all happened to be African nationals, were caught off Libya's coast. One Nigerian said she paid 500,000 naira for the dangerous trip, but is still hoping to cross the Mediterranean in search of a better life.
I come from Nigeria. I know people die in this sea, but I know my case will be different. I know I will succeed. Then the money I paid to embark on this trip, all my expenses is 500,000. 500,000 naira.
Well, that sure raises a lot of questions. Why is she running? Where is she going exactly in Europe? Well, questions we'll deal with later. But finally, on Network Africa, the authorities in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, are set to continue with their plan to demolish the city's unsafe residences, as follows last month's collapse of a building in Huruma district, in which 51 people died. 200 buildings have been earmarked for demolition. Today, 6 buildings next to the original area of the collapse are due to be demolished after residents were given a week's notice to leave. That's Network Africa today. Thanks for watching. I am Amarachi Ubani.